Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. Back with a update on the Williams Challenger. You guys can see I have it completely tore apart, except for the tender. The boiler is sitting over here. You guys can kind of see inside there. These two screws right here hold the big lead weight that sits in there. You guys can see kind of the cutout area for the gearbox. Motor sits in this area when it's all attached. It's a pretty, just this piece alone is very large, very heavy with the weight in there. A lot of nice detail on that. Right now I'm working on making sure I'm facing the wheels the right way for what is isolated and what needs to pick up power. So when the locomotive is assembled, the fireman's side is the isolated side, and the engineer's side is the pickup side. Drivers, best way to see that is I don't know if I'll be able to actually show you here. There's a little bit of a gap in that back seat right there, and I don't think my cameras will pick it up, but there's actually a red gasket in there that separates those two. And then on the pickup side, it is just the tire is mounted straight to the rim or the wheel. Nothing changed there. You guys can see just the size of these and the big gears. The front and rear engines are both powered from the middle axle. The gear boxes are over here, and it's one motor that runs both engines. So I'll try to set this up. So you guys, here's the big Pitman can motor. This is what came in it. Mounts back here in the mount. The weight has the shaft on it that hooks to this shaft that runs down the gear tower. The rear engine middle axle sits through here, and then also shafts forward and hits a couple U-joints and a sliding joint, and then comes to the front gearbox, which is just a single worm gear that comes in top, and that runs that front gear right there. All that's done really nicely. The rear gear tower is actually has some suspension to it. This spring and this screw right here, screw sits through the top of this hole. The spring goes in between the bottom and the frame and mounts right here, so there's not actually a stiff connection. So this has the ability to kind of move and rotate a little bit like that. It's not going to do that quite that much, but it allows for some suspension in there. So really well designed. The gears in here are all, I believe they're brass gears. Really nice cut gears. They run really smooth. Or they might be copper, I can't remember. You guys can see the rear engine frame and just the size of this and how nice it is. Nice leaf spring detail, and then you guys can also see the journals where the bearing boxes sit, and each one has a spring in it, and that's what allows the locomotive to actually have really nice suspension. So each axle has its own suspension, and it works really nice too. Some of these springs I've had to kind of re-straighten out when I took it apart the first time, because some of them got compressed and kind of moved out of place. On these bearings here, they just they don't have a specific little indent hole that they kind of have a home for, so they kind of are able to wander on the top of this. Not enough to fall out, but enough to get out of alignment and kind of bend in an odd way. So just make sure that I place those as good as I can when all those go back together. And just for size reference, this is a axle off of a Athearn Genesis Challenger compared to the 2-rail O scale. So you really get to see just a pretty cool, if I can get that to sit still. Here's your size difference between HO and 2-rail O scale. Now HO, I'm sure many of you already know that it is half of O. So this is half the size of that. Almost looks a little smaller than half, but it is scale half size. And it's pretty neat to see those components next to each other, because there is quite a huge size difference. So it's always kind of neat to see those crank pins. You can see how tiny the crank pins are on the HO one versus the crank pins on the O scale one. I also went and stripped the paint off of the connecting rods and the main rods. If you guys watched the first video, you'll notice that these rods have paint. If my camera would focus, have paint just on the web of it. And I'm not a big fan of that. I don't like how that looks. I would prefer the rods just to be all nice and shiny like this, all natural. And these rods actually have a really nice finish underneath that paint, so I was kind of happy to see that. The cylinder rods, crossheads, some of the valve rods here, all that stuff's nice and clean. Like I said, I got the paint off of these main rods. These are really long, decent sized components. Got all that clean and ready to go back together. Kind of have the eccentrics laid out pretty much how I took them off, just that way I know what's for the front engine, what's for the rear engine. Just trying to make sure I keep stuff straight, because I really don't want to mix parts around. Over here you guys can see I have the steam pipes off, these flexible steam pipes. You guys can see they can telescope, and then also the various flexible joints done just with screws. Those are really nice and work really well once they're placed on the locomotive. All the brake rigging is just, this is actually plastic, a plastic piece with a screw through it, and those screw into these holes on the sides. I'm going to wait till I have the wheels on to get these back on there, so that way I can get them set to where they're not rubbing on the wheels, because that is kind of a thing that you really have to be careful of. If it's rubbing on either the wheel behind it or the wheel in front of it, that's creating extra drag, and I don't want any extra drag on the mechanical system on this. Here you guys can see we have the whole front engine frame with the cylinders still on there, the pilot, and the compressors. This also has that nice leaf spring detail, and then also has the springs for each journal. So those bearing boxes sit in there, and that creates the individual suspension for each axle. And these frames are pretty decent sized. Just themselves have pretty nice weight to them. Of course, this one's a little bit heavier just because it does have the cylinders on there right now, and the pilot Pilot has really nice detail. It's got the flip-out coupler, which is just a dummy coupler, spot for a headlight, the railings, some of the covers, the coupler lever on there. Really nice detail. All that's everything except for these wire hand railings. All the rest of that's all brass. You guys can kind of see some of the brass shining through on the tops of these mounts for the steam pipes. And then see the unpainted areas where those bearings sit. Just big chunks of brass that are really nicely soldered together. Really good soldering joints on all this stuff. This is the second time this is actually the third or second time I've taken this apart, and everything's super solid, really good. Nice soldering joints, nothing has broken off. These big sections here that kind of hold they have the crosshead guides on there, which are really nice. That's actually plated brass right there. The eccentric link and these ends of the valve rods screw into here. They sit with each other in there. Part of the reverser on the front, on the front section here, this is for the front engine. This is actually what helps hold up the engine, that rod that goes across there, and you guys can see some lubricant on that area. That's kind of where the paint is wearing off. On the bottom of the boiler here is this bracket with this tongue that hangs out, and when everything is upright, that tongue sits in that area. I don't know if I can really show you guys too well, but you guys can kind of get the gist of it. It actually rides in that area right there, and when you lift up the locomotive, that keeps that from letting the whole front engine sag down. So that's kind of a thick part. That is some type of a steel. It's like they kind of did that blackening technique to it, but that's a pretty heavy duty steel part. Other neat things that kind of keep stuff in line, on the pilot truck here, you guys see that tongue on there. You guys can see how thick that is. That's not an easy thing to bend. Now normally like on an HO locomotive or something, that would be like where a spring would sit. That actually sits inside of a track that is in between the two cylinders up front here, and you guys can see that track with the grease on it there. That tongue sits in between those two, that track area right there, so that way when you lift up the locomotive, that keeps the pilot truck from sagging down and potentially bending your tongue on that. So really well thought out for lifting the locomotive. The only thing that doesn't really have support when you lift the locomotive is the trailing truck. The trailing truck just bolts on that area right there, and doesn't really have any other doesn't have anything to help hold up the rear, but it is a pretty stout screw that sits in there. Kind of has a flush mount seat in there where that sits, so it doesn't sag too bad, but it does allow for some nice up and down movement if you have irregularities in the track, so that way that can follow nicely. The covers that keep the axles in place, these are assembled upside down, of course, and then once you get your wheels set in there, then these cover plates go on top of that and keep the drivers from falling out. So it's really nice, well thought out system. Some spacers that sit in between the rear post of the connecting rod and the main rod. Those are really nice, well-machined spacers that sit in between there on that crank pin. And then you guys can kind of see on the eccentric leak, or the eccentric cranks, they're slotted. And you guys can kind of see the end of that crank pin is slotted, so those can really only go on one way, and you know very quickly if it's on upside down or on the correct way. All those are nicely riveted together with the eccentric rod and the link to the crank. All that's got a decent amount of play in it, but not a goofy amount of play in it. So that way that stuff has a fairly tight clearance between the eccentric crank and the main rod, so you got to make sure those are set just right so they're not knocking into each other. But yeah, making pretty good progress so far. I have to now basically, I kind of went and re-cleaned a few things, not just stripped some paint off some stuff, but cleaned up a few things. I gotta re-clean some of these wheels. Really, the biggest thing is when I start putting this back together is I have to make sure I'm facing these wheels the correct direction. Now I already have my pilot truck and trailing truck are correct. Pickup wheels are on the engineer side. Isolated wheels are on the fireman side. So, and then once I get the locomotive done, I'll work on the tender. And I'll have to make sure that it's vice versa, where the pickups are on the fireman's side and the isolated wheels are on the engineer's side. And then I have to try to figure out the wiring. Should be fairly simple wiring. There are two negatives that split off of this, and I think that was for lights. I am not going to do any lighting on this at the moment. Basically, just want to get it fully functional, running, oiled up really good, because it is just going to go back in the box for quite a while, or I might have it out for a little bit just to display it. But right now I'm not worried about the lighting. I can figure that out later. I just have to get the initial wiring on the motor done, because there is a pickup point here that is a clipped wire. I'm probably going to just solder that straight to that, not have that be like a pinch. And that is, the bottom of that is where the tongue of the tender hooks to. So basically, doesn't really matter what I choose to be positive or negative, whether the locomotive is picking up the positive side and the tender is picking up the negative side. I would like that to be correct with my controller though. And I do have black and red wires for positive and negative. I can never remember once I unhook these which is supposed to be on which rail, because I have it to where when my direction is to the right, that's basically forward and reverse. So I'm gonna wire it kind of up for this controller. It's never gonna run with another locomotive. If I do ever get the chance to run this, it will run by itself. So I'm not too worried about things being flip-flopped. And if it does become an issue, it's not going to be too hard to just unsolder two wires and flip them. So shouldn't be too bad. I just have to make sure once I get everything back together, I need to just basically put it as a free-rolling frame on the track, turn on my power pack and power it up and make sure I'm not shorting. That's going to be the biggest thing, is just making sure I don't have any shorts through the frame, through the bottom of the boiler here, any of that stuff. So so a few things to figure out yet, but it's like I said, this isn't going to be a a super in-depth. I mean, it's kind of a super in-depth project, but it's not hard by any means necessary. This is actually for all the Athearn steamers that I've torn apart. Working on this is a dream because all the parts are big and they're easy to handle, and it's harder to lose some of these parts. So it is there is an aspect to this that's miles easier than working on this much smaller Athearn stuff. So I kind of have that going for me, and I've had this apart a few times. I just got to make sure I put it back together correctly. So like when I have these frames flipped upside down, I need to make sure I'm flipping these upside down, so that way once I flip everything right side back up, those wheels are facing the right way. And hopefully that solves my problem. I think that was my issue last time, is I just kind of threw everything together. I didn't pay attention to what way those wheels were facing, and that's what the shorting issue was. I wouldn't have had to take apart quite this far if I didn't have that shorting issue, but it kind of worked out anyway. It gives me a chance to kind of make sure everything's oiled up. I really want to make sure these bearings are oiled up really nice. I have to go and clean the teeth on these gears here, so that way those are nice and clean when I go to put those together, and just really make sure everything's really good. Still using the original grease in this. Yes, it is over 30-year-old grease, but it is still good. This was a completely sealed system for a really long time. Didn't move for a really long time. Sometimes grease can separate if it sits long enough, but this grease is kind of a red color, and it's still in pretty good condition. It's still a nice thick viscosity. It's gonna be good for the gears. Everything rolls really nice. There's no binding. It doesn't feel overly stiff. So that should be fine. It's not dirty. Normally I'm pretty big on like cleaning and re-greasing, but that grease is still good. So we're just gonna run it. Shouldn't cause any issues at all. Those gears are in mint condition in there. This locomotive has very low runtime. The guy that I got it from, I think he only ran it a little bit, and I only ran it back and forth on a test track after I got it a couple times, so it does have fairly low runtime. The motor is in really good condition. It spins really nice. It's not overly noisy. I have hooked my leads up to those posts, and I've rotated it up to speed, forward and reverse, and it's really, really nice, quiet, smooth running motor. So if this one ever does crap out on me, though, I do have a replacement, a direct replacement for this, but nothing wrong with the original, so we're going to try to keep as pretty much all the original stuff, because nothing's wrong with it. So yeah, I'll probably have get the front and rear engines back together, and get all the drivers in, and get the connecting rods all on, and probably get the gearing all back together, and I'll do another video so that way you guys can kind of see those fully assembled with all the cool details and everything on there, so that way you guys can see just how substantial of a piece that is when it's all together. It's pretty impressive. So that's gonna be it for this video, guys. Hopefully you've enjoyed the update on this, and until next time, take care.